All right. We can get started. To start out, I just want to say good evening. Thank you all for being here. This is a July 18, 2023 meeting of the Housing and Community Development Commission. Committee. The first thing we need to do is determine a quorum. Marion?
Lindsay, do you want to call the roll?
Chair Feingold.
You can turn your mic on. Press the button in front of you. There we go.
Chair Feingold.
Here.
Councilmember Hara Curries.
Here.
Councilmember Reed.
Here.
Committee member Rodriguez.
Here.
Committee member Zolomi.
Here.
Committee member Thurston.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Burns.
Burns and Ravel are not here, or I don't know if Council Member Burns is going to be joining via Zoom. I know Council Member Ravel is not here today. We have a quorum. All right. If you could, Lindsay, if you could introduce our newest member of the Housing and Community Development Committee.
We'd like to welcome committee member Chloe Thurston to the Housing and Community Development Committee.
Hello, thank you.
You want to quickly introduce yourself?
My name is Chloe Thurston. I'm a resident of the 3rd Ward in Evanston. I've been here for 9 years. I'm a professor at Northwestern, political science, American politics. Thank you.
Welcome to the
Thank
committee.
you for coming.
We're happy to have you on the committee.
And I think we have an update on staffing at the city.
Yes, we do. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So I just wanted to also welcome Liz Williams, who is seated right next to me. She is currently the planning manager and is going to be starting taking over some of the housing and grant management role as interim. She's going to be handling mostly policy item while I will stay on as a supervisor to handle grant management.
Thank you.
Welcome, Liz.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, we can come to the public comment section. The purpose of public comment is to enable members of the public to provide input on any topic on the agenda. The committee may question the commenter, but a response is not required. The length of the public comment period is normally 15 minutes. Tonight, we are going to extend that. Lindsay, how many people are signed up to give public comment? Do we know?
Over 10.
Okay. Well, there seem to be many people in this room, I'm sure, that want to speak. You know, we're all very glad to have you here and want to hear what you have to say. But we also have committee business to do tonight, so we do want to limit each commenter's comments to 2 minutes. We will be timing. And I would request that if somebody has already said something that you agree with or that is what you wanted to say, if you can limit your comments, tell us that you echo somebody else's comment. We want to be respectful and give everybody a chance to speak, but we also want to be as expedient as possible so we all can get home tonight at a reasonable hour. So I hope that that is understood. And I think, Lindsay, are you able to identify the first speakers?
Sure. So first we have Hillary Bean.
If you could sign up online to speak, that would be saying similar things to what I would say, and I would
If you'd like to forfeit your time, we can,
them, I'm going to call them or.
we're going to call the people in the room first and then we call the folks online.
I will say.
And then if we can call 3 names at a time, just so folks can line up.
Following Hillary will be Joe Moore and Wendy Paul.
And your time will start when you're at the
Okay,
podium.
so Wendy's going. Hi, so my name's Hillary Bean. I am a resident at Avidor Evanston. I am here to speak in, I am for the changes to the ordinances that will require landlords to provide a reason and a cause. I have just been, in effect, thrown out of my home of 3 years. I'm in affordable housing and I am handicapped and have a variety of reasons not to move. And yet I am not, I have to. And it, there should be, I should be told what a reason would be. And other people in the building that have gotten notices too. Well, one other so far. There's no rhyme or reason that we know of. And as residents and tenants and senior citizens, we deserve some consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Joe Moore. Sorry, after Joe Moore, we have Wendy Paul and Eileen Thomas.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Joe Moore. Some of you might know me as the former alderman of Chicago's 49th Ward, the Rogers Park community. Rogers Park, as you know, borders the city of Evanston. And I'd like to say that during my tenure as alderman, we built bridges, not walls, with our neighbors to the north. But I'm also an Evanston native. Attended Oakton School, Shute Junior High, ETHS graduate, go Wildcats. And during my time when I moved to Rogers Park after I graduated from college, I was very active with the Rogers Park Tenants Committee. I was a strong supporter and advocate for the landlord-tenant Bill of Rights, passed petitions in support of it, was excited when it was enacted. And as alderman and as chairman of the City Council Committee on Housing, I was very strong in making sure that that ordinance stayed strong and was not watered down. I also was a landlord for 10 years. When my wife moved in with me, we were unable to sell her condo and we were landlords or housing providers for 10 years. I'm here today just to add a word of caution to you as you consider the just cause ordinance. I'm certainly sympathetic, as I mentioned, to the concerns of the tenants, but I also, over my years as alderman, have been very sympathetic to the needs of the community. And one of the things that has proven very challenging are problematic residents of buildings, problem landlords who create havoc across their community and among fellow tenants. It is very difficult to remove those folks unless they aren't, if they're not behind in their rent. It's very difficult to file a eviction action against and to find the proof to justify removing a troublesome tenant. And so one of the things that I often did working with my neighborhood and my community is to urge landlords when their tenant's lease was up, not to renew the lease. It solved the problem, it benefited the community, and it was a very, very useful tool to ensure the order of my community. So I urge you to consider all the unintended consequences
Can we ask
of
you to
a
wrap up?
just cause ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Next, we have Wendy Paul, then Eileen Thomas, and then Max Seeley.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Wendy Paul, and I live in a 55 plus community. It's called the Avador. It's in downtown Evanston. And I'd like to present to you a letter, kind of a petition that some of the residents have signed. And I'm just gonna, it's short, I'll read it into the record and you can have the original. We live in a 55 plus community, the Avador in downtown Evanston. Many of us are widows or otherwise single women on fixed incomes. All of the proposed amendments that you're considering are important, but we're especially focused on the proposal that would require a landlord to have just cause for failure to renew a tenant's lease. No one should have to be uprooted from their home for no reason and have to face the many burdens of moving, especially in a tight rental market like Evanston. But as seniors, we are especially vulnerable to the physical challenges of packing and moving and finding a new place accessible and appropriate for the elderly. In the last few months, 3 residents in our building were given notices that their leases would not be renewed for no given or apparent reason, and were given only a few months' notice to vacate. One of these residents receives disability payments. Another suffers from a debilitating illness. We urge you to support this critical bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Eileen Thomas and then Max Seeley and then Tina Payton.
Okay, I can't read the comment that I sent in previously before the
Can I ask you for the folks online to move the mic closer to your mouth?
thank
You can adjust the mic.
before the Evanston housing provider feedback meeting and also before the last meeting. So I am a little concerned that my concerns as a small housing provider are not being heard. So I'd like to know, well, what I sent in was an example of a disruptive tenant, and I got absolutely no feedback whatsoever. So my question is, who on this committee or someone else in the staff, do I have to go to with this example in order to be heard? This is my question.
We typically don't respond during public comment, but if staff can forward that email to us, I'm happy to respond to it during discussion.
That comment, can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me now?
Here can I forward that?
That comment was provided by email, and it was included as part of your public comment provided in written format as part of the emails you received. So the committees received that comment.
Okay.
It's also been recently posted on the website as part of the written public comment as well on the committee's page.
So we will respond to it during discussion
Not today?
today, if we get to just cause today.
Get there.
Can you repeat your name one last time? So sorry about that.
Eileen Thomas.
Eileen.
Eileen Thomas. I'm a 40-year small housing provider in Evanston.
Okay, I'll look for your comment and respond to it. Thank you.
We have Max Seeley and then Tina Payton and then Betty Esther.
Good evening. I'm here to speak in favor of adding a just cause amendment to Evanston's resident landlord tenant ordinance. Just cause is not about punishing landlords. It's not about making life more difficult for landlords. It's about providing stability to those who are renting in our community. When people are out of their housing, they lose a lot more than just a roof over their head. They lose services as well. They are more likely to be repeat offenders of homelessness, be going through the system again and again because they don't have that stability. And just cause is a common sense way to help mitigate that. Just cause will still allow landlords to evict tenants who violate their lease, who don't pay their rent, who do other things that violate the legal contract that they entered into. All it does is provide that safeguard for tenants to know where their housing will be in the next 3 months, the next 6 months. to be able to have some stability. So I urge this committee to move Just Cause forward to council and to eventually be put into the city code. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Tina Payton, followed by Betty Esther.
Good evening. Just Cause, this is not an eviction. This is a non-renewal of a lease. Housing providers do not want to spend time not renewing leases of good tenants. We have to spend a significant amount of money repairing units once tenants move, and a lot of time screening and approving new tenants for our units. Housing providers have a variety of reasons when they will not renew a tenant's lease. Smoking in a non-smoking building, having pets in a pet-free building, moving in persons that are not on the lease, nuisance or threatening other tenants that are threatening other tenants, neighbors, or the housing provider, criminal damage to the unit, building or other tenants' property. And the list goes on. Housing providers do not need government entities policing a non-renewal of a lease and making non-renewals a criminal act. When we go to court, you're not going to be there. And when they ask the tenant, are you smoking in a non-smoking building? Do you have a dog? Did you move your boyfriend in? Are you going to be there to tell the judge, yeah, they're doing these things? No, you're not. And we cannot prove this when we have just cause. This is illegal and should not be part of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I read the just cause and a lot of the information that is going forth for the tenant and the landlord. And the one thing that I do not see is, let's get acquainted. There is no educational of the landlord and the tenant to say, hey, these are the rules that we have here in Evanston that you must be by. These are the non-rule that we hope that you would go by. There is nothing in this community, and it is lacking in the way of communicating with the residents about a lot of the law ordinance and things that you pass. You just pass, throw it out there and say, live with it. And that's not a just way to rule anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty Esther. Next, we have some people who signed in on the back of the sign-in sheet. So I'm not sure if you want to make a public comment or not. Sue Lobach.
Do you want to cue the other two folks up?
The next two are Sarah Delgado and Ida Saluski. Okay, thank you. Following Ida, we have Jose Alberto Coronado. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm Sue Lolbach with Connections for the Homeless. And we support the changes being considered tonight. And in particular, I'd like to speak to Just Cause. We know at Connections that people have so many barriers that they're facing just getting into housing in the first place. And that when they finally do get into housing, it is incredibly important for them to be able to keep it and to be able to stay there. We spend time working with them. We spend time working with landlords trying to make it so that that can happen, because cycling in and out of housing is really, really destructive. We do agree that landlords should be able to remove, not renew with people for just cause. for reasons that are breaking the lease, that are causing problems to neighbors and to property. We absolutely do not believe that people should be removed for unjust cause, for reasons that are not in the lease and that are jeopardizing people's ability to live their lives. So we hope that you will consider that and move forward accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jim Skirmerhorn, followed by Carl Kettler, Dominic Boss. Do you still want to? Okay, so we have Jim Skirmerhorn, Carl Kettler, Sharon Goodman.
I think I wrote Jim. I'm Dan Skirmerhorn. I should be on their list. Jim's not here. So
Sorry, Dan.
That's all right. Again, my name is Dan Skirmerhorn with Skirmerhorn and Company in Evanston. And I think I would echo Alderman Moore's caution with regard to just cause in the issues that it makes landlords face. Unfortunately, the courts are not as responsive as we all would hope they would be. The time it takes to go through the court, even in a straightforward case where it's a non-payment of rent, is months to years. When you're talking about something other than non-payment of rent, it's all but impossible to get someone out. Constantly, the time that it takes us to go through that process is way beyond the end of the term of a lease. The ability to non-renew a tenant in those situations to protect the other tenants in the building, to get rid of the issue, is the most expedient method that we have been able to use because of the limitations that we find in dealing with the courts. So unfortunately, the consequences are not only going to be borne by the landlord, but the good tenants in the building who are asking us to get rid of the party, or the neighbors who are asking us to get rid of the party because of the nuisance or the problem that they're causing. So you're basically tying our hands, and it's kind of interesting to me. I think it was a year or so ago, there was a discussion about licensing landlords so that they would be held to account for situations where they weren't dealing with tenants who were causing trouble and not getting them out. Now you're saying we're going to tie your hands and not give you the opportunity to get them out. So I guess we got to figure out what we want here and who are we trying to help here? I'd hate to see us getting rid of the good tenants who are going to move because they can't take it anymore because one bad actor in the building is causing multiple good tenants to move. So I think we should, unfortunately, not get this solved in a matter of 2-minute increments, but perhaps continue the discussion with a group of landlords, tenants, et cetera, to come to a consensus on how best to deal with this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon Goodman.
My name is Sharon Goodman and I live at the Avador. And at 17.
Can you pull the microphone towards you? Thank
Is
you.
that better? Okay.
Thank you.
Sharon Goodman, I live at the Avador. It's an over 55 community. I want to say I love my apartment. I really love the community that has developed at the Avador. And I plan that to be my final move. I'm 82 years old. I did not plan on moving out. But since Greystar has taken over the Avador, the atmosphere has changed considerably. A lot of cost-cutting measures, but that have some perks have disappeared, but that is not the big problem. The bigger problem is fear and unease in the building, especially since leases have not been renewed without any explanation, 2 of which were people that were disabled. And warnings were given for people speaking about comments about flowers, plastic flowers in the lobby. Management should not be able to not renew without sufficient cause. And coming here has given me a lot of fear about retribution for coming here and speaking out. But I feel it's very important to do this because this is the apartment that I really love and want to stay in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Sarah Peterson, followed by Mary Rosinski and Aaron Bornstein.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Peterson, and I am a homeowner in Evanston's 6th Ward who lives, works, and sends my children to school in Evanston. I'm speaking today in support of the just cause for eviction clause proposed in updates to Evanston's residential landlord-tenant ordinance. Evanston is a community that prides itself on its diversity, and including this clause is a concrete way to back our sentiments with updated policy. It is important to notice who is unable to take the time to show up for public comment and whose voices are missing tonight and in the last week's meeting, whether due to evening work commitments, childcare, transportation, mobility, or other burdens. We need to keep in mind tenants who are much larger group, but more more dispersed, less resourced, and often marginalized, being less heard in this process than landlords with resource who are able to speak up tonight. More than 2/5 of Evanstonians are renters, valuable members of our community who deserve our support. Evictions disproportionately impact our Black and Brown neighbors, contributing to racial inequities and the growing loss of Black Evanstonians from our community. According to the Eviction Lab's national research, Black renters and women face a disproportionate share of eviction filings, and households with children are even more likely to receive an eviction judgment. The Eviction Lab also reports that evictions can lead to job loss, an increase in rental costs, and can negatively impact even infant development for those evicted during pregnancy. I've read lots and heard lots of misinformation circulating about just cause. This update would not prevent landlords from evicting tenants for lack of payment or for breaking their lease agreements, as some have claimed. Instead, by limiting evictions and lease non-renewals to a set of good causes, we would enable our neighbors to remain in their homes and establish a sense of community without fear of being evicted through no fault of their own. This increases neighborhood stability and allows a greater sense of community in our neighborhoods.
If you could wrap it up, please.
Thank you.
Mary Rosinski, then we have Aaron Bornstein and Eric Passett.
Hi, my name is Mary Rosinski. I want to speak. I agree with Mr. Schermerhorn and Mr. Moore on this issue. It's not as easy as one's good and one's bad. This is too broad of a brush to handle such a huge issue. I've been a landlord for over 32 years, and I've worked with my tenants, and if they're late, that's fine. In that time, I've only had 2 people who they paid the rent, but they were absolutely miserable. They hated my kids. I don't want to create lifetime tenants, giving one person rights over the entire building, and they don't have to meet these 7 or whatever 9 qualities. It sounds tonight, and I'm in perfect agreement with whatever's going on at the Avador. It needs to be addressed because I've heard this outside over the last week. So I'm thinking that maybe the committee, before they do anything, should start looking at the rules of new construction. I also want to point out that a lot of the existing construction, and I know a lot of these landlords, and they're good, and they have not, we don't charge late fees usually. We usually don't raise rents. We're a business. We're not trying to take advantage of people, but you are going to disinterest people from investing in Evanston. And just so you know, a couple of years ago, I did an analysis on new construction versus old construction rents and the range difference. And most of these people are providing rentals at 30% to 40% less than new construction. So maybe before you do anything, you might want to start looking at where your affordable housing really lies and who's providing it. And don't target the good people that are good landlords, and don't target the good tenants, but figure out how to surgically address problem landlords and problem tenants. That would be my suggestion, please.
Thank you. Aaron Bornstein.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Bornstein. I'm a property owner here in Evanston. I've been in the community since about 2009 when I bought my first building here. I have 4 buildings, about 8 units. I agree with the comments that Joe Moore, Dan Schermerhorn, Tina Payton, Mary Rosinski, they were all spot on. I just want to speak briefly about affordable housing. The issue here comes in, we have a shortage of affordable housing. And the way to address that, the way to solve some of these problems is we provide incentives to developers to move this forward. The standard is somebody puts affordable units in their property, you give them a zoning increase so they can increase the density to that. That encourages affordable units. The other standard ways to encourage affordability is you expedite processing or permitting fees, you can give fee waivers, you can reduce parking requirements, and finally you get to property tax credits. And these are all ways at minimal or low cost to the city that you grow your affordable housing, which solves many of the underlying problems. I don't hear any of these ideas under discussion though. This is a way to work with the real estate community. So we work cooperatively to grow ourselves out of this issue. Instead, I see a tax on the real estate community. You've come in with this thing that's just cause. I understand there are people who have opinion on the other side, but when we look at what the real estate community is telling you, this is a bad way to do it. This really hampers our ability to run our business, to take care of our tenants, and to provide affordable housing. And if you go down this path, if you become the only community, I think within 500 miles that does just cause, you will be the least investable community in the Midwest. And so when you have a time, if you look at what happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, they passed a form of rent control, the only one in their area. It stopped all development in St. Paul. Everybody moved to Minneapolis. They moved out to the suburbs. Why would you do that as a real estate person? Why would you go to a community that doesn't want you? So don't take these actions. Don't ignore our voices. Please don't pass this ordinance.
Thank you.
Next, we have Eric Passett, followed by Peter O'Brien and Helen Cho.
I'm Eric Passett. I'm the owner of North Shore Apartments and Condos. I've been in property management for at least 30 years, apartment rental business. And like I spoke last time, what you guys are, what this committee is trying to change is going to have the exact opposite effect. So what happened, let's say a year ago, a big property owner sold all their buildings in Evanston for different reasons from what's happening right now. However, buildings all got rehabbed and raised the rents by double because now they're newer construction rather than older. So if you force out owners like us who try to keep our rents down, try to work with tenants, try to invest in our own community, the exact opposite is going to happen. What we did 20 years ago, Dan Schermerhorn and I were on a committee, like I spoke last time. You got some landlords together, you got some aldermen together, you got everybody on a committee, sit down and work things out. You didn't get one side of it deciding everything for everybody else. If you get a group of landlords who don't want to invest in Evanston anymore, which is exactly what you're getting. When people come to say, should you buy a building in Evanston? I say, absolutely not. Because why would you when you have this many regulations? Like I said before, the Evanston tenant landlord ordinance has been in effect for a long time. It does a great job. I've read that backwards and forwards. It is so tenant friendly. It's scary. However, it has worked for a long time. Why would you want to change something like that? Why would you install something that's going to make us not want to invest in Evanston and then go the exact opposite way? So you get somebody like now the Wirtz buildings are owned by crowdfunding. So they don't really care about Evanston. All they care about is the money. So they're going to take and get the exact most amount they could out of rents. We don't try to do that. We try to be reasonable to people. We'd rather have a full building than have 10 units full at 3,000 and 20 units empty. The crowdfunding people don't care. So I hope you would keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter O'Brien.
And point of order, I just want to point out our council rules that when it comes to committee that we allow 20 minutes for public comment. And sometimes we let that rule slide both at council and at committees, but given our late start today, I think the folks that we have called, we should go through. And if there are folks who really feel they need to share something that hasn't been said, please state yourself. But I would move that we after the next.
There are two left.
Oh, there are only two left. All right.
And also this BCC has its own specific rule that are prevailing. So the rule is that there's 15 minutes of public comment, and then it's at the discretion of the chair to potentially extend, which she has so far.
All right.
Good evening, committee members. Thanks for your hard work. My name is Peter O'Brien, sorry, resident of Evanston and a business owner in Evanston. As part of that business, we own and manage a small portfolio of rental apartments, less than 30 units. I just wanted to bring up a couple of things, the economic considerations that maybe people haven't put a lot of focus on just yet. And that is the focusing on the just cause ordinance. Most landlords in this town and in the area use 1-year leases for their residents, and then it's renewed after 1 year most often to put in play the just cause clause in the landlord-tenant ordinance effectively converts those leases to lifetime estates, which is a totally different interest in real estate, and it has a totally different value. And who will be paying the difference in value in the long run? It will be the tenants. Likewise, one of the clauses that people haven't mentioned tonight is the right of first refusal. Not sure why they haven't mentioned it, because the right of first refusal on a sale of a property also has significant economic cost, and that cost over time will be passed on to the tenants. I would guess you have your experts, you have your actuaries, lawyers and accountants. But I would guess that all things being equal, that rents would go up 20 to 30% in the not too distant future if these provisions are passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Helen Cho and then Herb Brenner.
Hi, my name is Helen Cho. Thank you so much for this time. I'm currently an Evanston tenant. I first came to Evanston in the early 2000s to attend college here. And then 20 years later, just last year, I was delighted to land back in Evanston as a visiting assistant professor at Northwestern. However, my time in Evanston has largely been spent navigating my difficult and precarious rental situation. I pay my rent on time. I've never been in violation of the lease and receive my full security deposit each time I've rented, and I've rented for the past 20 years of my life. Despite this, I'm facing non-renewal of my lease by my current landlord, who appears to be engaging in retaliatory behavior. What brought me here today is the thought that if this is happening to me, a person who is privileged in many ways, what might be happening to folks who are not as privileged. So tonight I'm advocating for three things. First, the city of Evanston's rental inspection process needs proper oversight and review to ensure it is protecting tenants and not privileging landlords. The current process seems to be a way for the city of Evanston, landlords, and realtors to, as one building manager told me, make sure the right people are living in the building. Second, just cause prevents no-fault non-renewals at the whim of the landlord, such as retaliation for wanting to be present when someone enters the unit or asking for reimbursement for damaged items from a burst pipe in the unit. I didn't press the issue further, but shortly thereafter, I was sent a notice for non-renewal. Third, if landlords know they are not going to be renewing a tenant's lease, the tenant should be provided with 90 days notice, giving ample time to search for a rental unit, especially if the tenant has work, family, and community obligations that make it impossible to devote large chunks of time to their search. I strongly urge the committee to consider reforming the rental inspection system to prevent tenants and adopting just cause. This is the kind of systemic change we need to create the necessary conditions for all Evanstonians to not just reside in the city, but also thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Herb Brenner.
Hi, I'm not a resident of Evanston, but I am co-chairman of a fair housing organization, Open Communities, which is located in Evanston. And when I looked at this ordinance, it seemed to me that the people who would be affected most are the tenants of the landlords who spoke tonight, people who are paying modest rents. It's not going to be individuals who are in those luxury apartment buildings who are going to be affected by this. It's going to be these individuals paying modest rents. And those are the people who are most likely paying 40 or 50% of their income on rents right now, even though these these rents are supposedly affordable. So these are the individuals who are going to be hurt the most unless we pass this ordinance. They're going to be incurring costs which they really don't have. They don't have disposable income. You heard most of these people speaking today, they're on fixed incomes and they're not going to be able to afford a move like this. So I would say if a person has to move, at least let's provide them with some relocation assistance. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add that there were additional public comments that were written prior to the meeting and emailed to the committee prior to the meeting. Any additional written comment received will also be forwarded to the committee members following the meeting.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I believe that's the end of the public comment period. And now we will move to the business at hand. The first item of business is review and approval of minutes from the May 16, 2023 and June 20, 2023 meetings.
So moved.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments or edits?
Was there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Do we do a roll call?
It can be a voice vote. You can just say all those in favor.
All those in favor?
Say aye.
We do a roll call?
We don't
Okay.
have
We
to.
do a roll call, yes.
Okay. Lindsay or Mary?
I'm doing it.
You're doing it? Okay.
Chair Feingold,
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zolomie,
Aye.
Chloe Thurston. Aye. 6 votes in favor, the motion passes.
Just a point of order, it's just a few seconds, but just given the time, I just want to know, we don't have to do a roll call for every vote unless someone calls for it or the chair calls for it.
We do not have to. The staff would prefer to be able to keep track of it, so that we're able to keep track, yeah.
You don't have to, but you don't have to keep track of all of the individual votes. If it's a voice vote, you just note that the ayes have it. And if it's only if someone calls for a roll, do you need to track each individual member's vote?
Thank you.
All right, we will go on to old and new business. This would be an approval to recommend the expansion of the small medium landlord financial assistance program. Marian, are you doing a presentation? Okay, great.
Yes, I am just trying to make sure that I can show the map that I will be talking to on the screen that was provided in the packet right here. Thank you. So we're proposing the extension of the small landlord assistance program. This program was approved by the committee earlier this year. There's about $500,000 of fund that was allocated from ARPA. So far, we've received 23 applications. 13 have been approved. There's about $110,000 of funds that have been approved or disbursed at this point. We had about 10 denials. All the denials were based on the number of units. Landlords that didn't actually have losses that we could compensate, or the location of the units. We had 4 applications that were fully at the maximum of $15,000. Out of those 10 denials, there's 3 that could be eligible on under this new expansion. So essentially what we've done here, the original program was limited to 3 census tracts. And that was based on the emergency rental assistance priority sub-indices from the Urban Institute, using the COVID-19 impact and equity sub-index. So 8092, 8102, and 8103.01 were the census tracts that were eligible. We're proposing to expand the program to the 5 census tracts that are in blue on this map. I'm hoping you can see that. It's basically the census tract that are sandwiched in the middle. They're not highlighted in red. Those census tracts are essentially the census tract that are above the average of Evanston for the indices that I've mentioned before. So they're ranking above average for Evanston. As far as COVID impact and equity impact, that would include 810302, 8101, 8097, 8096, and 8095. We are also, as part of this, suggesting that we exclude 8094, which technically would be above average. But as we dug through the numbers and based on the notes provided by the Urban Institute, mentioning specifically that student population can skew numbers because they can often be a higher percentage low income. We looked through the data, and 8094 is showing much higher rents on average than the other areas for much smaller units. We also took a look at the landlords that would be eligible for this program within those census tracts, at least the ones that we have data on through the rental registration. It amounted to about 62 landlords that were for the vast majority renting upscale condos or single family home that were highly valued.
Thank you. So I'd like to open up to the committee members if you have any questions or comments about the presentation. No comments?
I do have a couple of questions, Marian, and it is by expanding the area to find landlords who need or can use these funds. Are we reaching out to people with higher means, obviously, since they're renting for higher amounts? Would there be a better use of the money?
We looked specifically to try to balance that conversation. We knew there was some conversation around affordability, prioritizing for affordable housing as much as possible. We specifically looked at rent prices and what kind of properties were around this area. The same qualification applies as far as the original program, as far as no landlord that owns more than 35 units and other items. We reconsidered whether there was a way to put any kind of maximum around affordability. Having seen how the first applications were going, it's extremely complicated to put in place, which is one of the reasons we suggested going this route. We know that population renting in those areas tend to have much lower rents and are more likely, especially for the property that may be eligible, the smaller property essentially, to be on the more affordable side. There may be some buildings that are more luxurious in those areas, but they're very, very likely to be above the 35 units maximum. So that essentially kind of exclude them. Yeah.
I would like to suggest, I was on this small task force for this subcommittee of our committee, and I would like to try to bring back to the conversation then that we reconsider what a small landlord is, not bring it up to the 35 units that were discussed and approved earlier for the original sections of the city where we could use this grant, and try to find landlords with smaller landlords, real small landlords that could use these funds, since we're kind of in need of finding them, instead of going to an area with higher rents, which means probably landlords have better resources to cope with whatever they went through COVID through the years of 2020 and 21, I believe.
So the program is, yes, it's 2021 versus 2019. So it's pre and post or in during.
So I would like to,
Is that an amendment that you're suggesting to the committee? That's an
I
option.
would think so, yeah.
Are you suggesting lowering the number of units per landlord based on a specific number? Or are you suggesting that for the new census tract specifically?
Didn't think about that far, but thank you for the clarifications. I would say that, yeah, for the new tract sectors of the city, to reduce the number of units to at a minimum to 25. But I would like to see that landlords with less units get some sort of priority, 10, 15 units or less, get the priority to have access to the funds. And I know it's probably an administrative nightmare for you guys to try to finagle with that, but I would suggest that if we're spreading out already thinner, maybe we worth the effort to reach to real small landlords.
So I'd like to hear maybe where other members of the committees are on this, and if that's something that the committee would like to move forward. And if you're looking to do a prioritization, then I would suggest that you amend it providing extra time. So we open it to a section and then we also open it broader, so we don't have to keep coming back to the committee and postpone providing assistance. So you could amend it to do 2 phases right now, as an example, if the committee so desires.
Do other committee members have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I think I appreciate your thought on making sure that it gets to the lower, the smaller landlords. I think, I mean, personally, based on the amount of money that we have left over, I was a little bit, given I think the enthusiasm that we'd heard from small landlords when we were going through the process, I would have thought that we would have already spent way more than the 110,000. So I was really surprised that we'd had this much left over. I think if we had a smaller amount and we'd kind of left over and that we're trying to maximize getting that into the hands of the truly small landlords, I would agree going down that route. But I feel since we have, 4/5 left, basically, that keeping the same parameters that we had for the previous census tracts would make sense. Because I have a feeling that given the extra eligibility, we probably are going to come back and still have money left over. That's just my thought based on how low that initial number was.
The thought behind what I said is that if we give priority to the truly small landlord, 10, 15 units or less, and if there is money left after we reach out to those small landlords, then open it up to the 35 units or less, to the landlords with 35 units or less. And you're right, by giving the way we have dispersed this money, most likely there'll be enough for everybody, but I am suggesting that we give priority to small landlords.
Does anyone else have any comments before I speak?
Yeah.
I just don't think we should keep changing the criteria, we've gone back and forth on it. And it is not a huge amount of money. Now, I live in the 2nd ward and there are probably landlords who own multiple buildings there. But again, let me just ask, and the people who applied and approved, what was the total number of units that each owned or about, do you know?
I don't have the number offhand. The majority, from what I remember, I can check now, were very small landlords, but I can double check.
Yeah, I just would rather not make more changes at this point. I mean, I'm for expanding the area, but I think we should keep the same criteria.
Councilmember Reed. You're fine. Okay. Can I begin? Okay. I would agree with council member Eric Harris and Joanne. I think we've discussed this a lot. And you're right, it might be an administrative nightmare to change it. So I guess I would ask as a point of clarity, if a committee member wants to propose an amendment, do we vote on that amendment?
Motion and second.
Yes, there needs to be a motion and a second from committee members, and then you can vote. If there's no second, then no.
Would Hugo make the statement himself? Okay, you
Make
want
the
to?
motion.
I don't think I will get the support, so I'm going to abstain from making
All
a
right.
motion.
I can add that despite the fact that the landlords that were eligible for this original program could own up to 35 units, the average number of units for the eligible applicants was 5, and it ranged from 1 to 15 currently.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me. I certainly understand the direction you're going. I also served on the task force that helped create this. I wonder, what are the barriers, given that we have 4/5 of the, or somewhere thereabouts of the funding reserved. Can you repeat? I may have missed it. What are some of the barriers and
Sure.
what
So I
exactly?
can also, I can tell you the who was not eligible and also the outreach we've done.
Just barriers in the interest of time.
So the location of the units, they had units that were not in the eligible area. The number of units, we had an application where they own 60 units. We had one where they owned a very, very high amount and tried to pass it off as a small business. And then there's some landlords that just didn't have any losses. So they tried to get compensation, but their tax return showed they made more money in 21 than in 2019. So they were not eligible for the program.
So to be clear, so we're not going to increase the threshold. The only question that is before us today is whether we should expand the number of areas. And has there been a motion on that?
Not yet.
I move that.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Chair Feingold.
Aye.
Councilmember Eric Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez.
Aye.
Joanne Zalomi.
Aye.
Chloe Thurston.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thanks. All right. The next item on the agenda is a presentation from staff regarding the just cause eviction topic.
All right, good evening. I'm going to introduce our guest speakers this evening. We have John from MTO, Dominic from Open Communities, and then Jonathan from Law Center for Better Housing. They've prepared a PowerPoint presentation to provide a summary overview of Just Cause, kind of what it is not, what other communities are doing. We're hoping to keep this discussion and overview to around 30 minutes. So I think their presentation will be around 10, maybe 15, and then we'll open it up to the committee for further discussion. Our hope this evening is that we will get direction from the committee on whether or not to continue pursuing this particular item as part of the update process, or if this particular topic warrants additional time and discussion of the committee. we can continue that discussion and talk about the timeline if that's how the committee decides they'd like to proceed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the presenters. Just in terms of logistics, we do have a microphone if you would like me to grab that for you so you don't have to step up to the podium. Is that your preference?
Either way.
I think stepping to the podium allows folks to see you online. So, and this podium here. And then I'll just note, just for proper order, I move item B, which is discussion and presentation of the just cause eviction overview. Second.
All right, motion passes. Did we have a second?
There was a second.
Okay, thank you. Roll call vote?
No.
Oh, no? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right, please proceed with the presentation.
I am. Are you going? Are you going to the podium? Are you sure? Okay.
Good evening, everybody. So last we get to the just cause topic. So, we're sort of just to acknowledge Open Communities is sitting here both as, advocates as well as, offering some expert opinion and perspective on what just cause is and isn't. So just to sort of define things, I thought it'd be good to go with sort of a agenda setting organization to offer a definition. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition defines just cause as you see on the screen here. So they say just cause, also known as a good cause or for cause eviction laws, are tenant protections that prevent evictions and promote housing stability by limiting the causes for which a landlord can evict a tenant or refuse to renew a tenant's lease when the tenant is not at fault or in violation of any law. So I think that's a pretty good definition. I think by now most folks are kind of familiar, but the idea is that the reasons for which landlords can either evict, and generally when we talk about eviction in this context, it would be sort of in a month-to-month context. It's true that the majority of these would be probably in a non-renewal context, but that those reasons are constrained in some way. And generally the way the paradigm works is that there are tenant fault reasons, which the tenant has substantially violated the lease, hasn't paid rent, and then there's no fault reasons, but I'll kind of get to that breakdown in a second. So, just some core components. We do see, some heterogeneity across the country around how these laws look. There's difference in detail in terms of the amount of tenant causes listed. There's differences in relocation assistance or the total lack of relocation assistance. So they are different. There's, cities like Los Angeles, Portland have ones that are more similar. There's just cause laws that exist statewide in a few states. So, some common core components. There is a prohibition on evicting or non-renewing a tenant, except for one of the enumerated causes. So, for instance, if it's not enumerated as a just cause to non-renew somebody strictly because you want to flip the unit or, because you just arbitrarily dislike them. Oh, great. Thank you. And then that would not be a just cause and would not be an allowable reason. So there's usually some kind of enhancement of notice requirements as part of just cause laws. It tends to be a common sense thing to make sure that folks, have certain notice requirements. And relocation assistance is a common feature of just cause laws so that the tenant has financial means to move. And these would be in cases where the eviction or non-renewal is prompted by something that was out of their control, that, through no fault of their own. So again, it's to prevent arbitrary and discriminatory evictions. This is of great importance to us as a fair housing organization interested in, preventing and stopping discriminatory behavior. Increases stability for renters, we would argue, when renters don't have to be fearful that they'll be sort of displaced at an arbitrary whim of the landlord. You would see greater tenure of tenancies and more stability in those homes. Greater transparency, as we heard from some of the speakers, folks are often evicted or non-renewed and they have no idea why. And they're never given clarity on that oftentimes. We think it's, fundamentally increases fairness between the tenant and landlord. There's some evidence that it prevents displacement. And again, placing some modest limits on sort of these strictly profit motivated turnovers of housing stock. So flipping units for, to jack up the rent, as we've seen so often. So I think the next slide is Jonathan from LCBH.
I Law Center for Better Housing is in the same boat as Open Communities in that we're advocates as well as experts. So just to be upfront about.
Could you speak closer to the microphone,
I'm
please?
sorry, let me a little taller. What isn't just cause? I mean, I think we saw in the last meeting and to some extent in this meeting as well, some misconceptions around what just cause is. I think one of the commenters said it's effectively granting a life estate, saying that landlords can't choose what to do with their property. And that's not the case. We're talking generally about concepts of just cause, so it's hard to say with specificity what causes are in an ordinance that hasn't been conceived of yet. But some common things. Just cause doesn't prevent landlords from removing bad tenants from their buildings. Landlords can issue termination notices.
Can you speak to the
still evict tenants who don't pay their rent. I'm sorry, did you have a question or am I just not close enough?
I think, yeah, if you could just be closer to the microphone or pull it towards you.
Understood. Tenants who abuse the property or use it for criminal activity, who disturb their neighbors or other tenants in the building, deny landlord access to the property, or otherwise fail to comply with the lease or with relevant laws. In all of those situations, the tenant under just cause formulations can be terminated and can be evicted if necessary. These are all considered just causes to end the tenancy. Just the same as exist under present law. And in most cases, those for-cause evictions, can end the tenancy more quickly than through no-cause non-renewal because they require shorter notice periods. Hit the next slide. Oh, I've got a clicker. Okay. Just cause also does not prohibit landlords from changing how they use their property. And I think we had some commenters last time who were concerned about being restrained from moving into the property themselves, using it for a relative, or doing some other thing if they decided they didn't want to rent anymore. And all of those are again reasons under just cause why landlords could decline to renew a tenancy. Or ultimately remove a tenant who doesn't leave. Some of these are drawn from the proposed ordinance in Chicago. Landlords can end the tenancy, if they want to move in themselves, if they want to move a family member in, if they wanted to convert to a condominium use, or if they needed, or wanted to perform substantial repairs or renovations, if they're required to by the city, or if they simply want to improve the building. And also they can end the tenancy if they simply want to remove the unit from the market or demolish the building. Those are also just causes to end the tenancy. Because the tenant hasn't done anything wrong in those cases, as Dominic mentioned a little bit, some forms of just cause do require payment of relocation assistance to help offset the costs of moving for those tenants. Another thing just cause isn't, just cause is not rent control. Landlords under just cause are largely free to raise the rent with appropriate notice. And if the tenant doesn't renew on the proposed terms, the tenancy will end, just like any tenant who doesn't elect to renew a lease with increased rent. And finally, and I'm sure there's a lot of disagreement over this point, but just cause does take into account small landlords and the particular circumstances that they face. Different forms of just cause deal with that differently. Small landlords might be excluded entirely from the ordinance. They might have reduced requirements. They might pay less in relocation assistance, and they might be supported by landlord mitigation funds, funded through landlord registration or other means. I think Dom's coming back for the next one.
Put it back for short guy range here. So just a quick review, and I know that Ms. Wade had sent around a memo that detailed some other examples of just cause features across the country. These are in addition to those. And, Jonathan referred to a proposal that exists in Chicago. You note that, Mayor Brandon Johnson has put that on the short-term goals to pass a just cause ordinance. And just for transparency, Open Communities has been involved in that movement as well. So a lot of what, I have the most expertise on is going to be the Chicago proposal, which is just a proposal, is not currently law. So other common features, obviously clarifying a process to cure violations is important if it doesn't already exist in the law, so that a landlord has to provide, a certain amount of notice for somebody to change some behavior before they take action. That's important to have as a sort of bedrock for just cause. You do often see exemptions for small, especially owner-occupied housing. This is a common exemption in residential landlord-tenant ordinances all over the country and fair housing law as well. The Chicago proposal does not offer full exemptions for small landlords, but those with 6 or fewer units in owner-occupied buildings have reduced requirements, including for relocation assistance. Rental registries tend to be also important, something we already have in Evanston. So just a little bit more specificity on the Chicago proposal. So there are essentially 3 buckets that cover the way the proposal is currently written, and this, of course, may be negotiated. 3 buckets of tenant fault causes. Just an outright refusal to renew. So there's an offer and the tenant refuses to renew the lease. That would, of course, be one. They've materially violated the lease in some way. And there's 14 days for a tenant to cure a material violation of the lease in this proposal, or they've not paid rent. So those are sort of the 3 buckets. And we'll see in other places, you'll see up to, 7, 8, 9, 10 more sort of granular tenant fault causes. There are 4 no fault causes where the tenant has done nothing wrong, but are still considered just or good causes. One would be if the unit's going to be converted to a condominium. One would be if they're moving in a qualified relative, which is defined in the ordinance. One would be for a substantial repair. And that piece, a certified contractor has to state that the repair would require that the unit would be unlivable during the repairs, demolition or removal of the housing altogether from the market. So those are the 4 no fault causes under the current Chicago proposal. And again, 6-unit owner occupied have some exemptions. These small landlords would pay less in relocation assistance under this paradigm. So 3 times the market rate per bedroom size instead of 5 times, which is the current standard in that proposal. And they would have flexibility through offering rent abatement, rent forgiveness. Just jumping over to Oregon, just cause sort of a different initial baseline. So just cause is only available after a year of tenancy in Oregon. And this is in a statewide law. There's a different sort of overlay in Portland, Oregon. There are practically identical no fault reasons in the Oregon statewide just cause, except for instead of condo conversion, which is not listed, the Oregon statute lists the landlord has sold the unit to someone who plans to move in. That's a general summary iteration of that as being a good cause. It also has 90-day notice requirements for the no fault causes, similar to the Chicago proposal. The state relocation assistance in Oregon is equal to 1 month's rent. And again, Portland has its own relocation assistance paradigm, and that would be increased for those renters. So just a couple other notes here. Owners of less than 4 units are exempt from the relocation assistance component in Oregon. And I already noted that Portland residents may owe more relocation assistance. So just jumping around to New Jersey, that state's good cause law has existed for about 50 years, and it lists a lot more specificity in the tenant fault provisions. So, in addition to non-payment violations of the lease agreement, that law also states things like conducting illegal activity, committing major property damage, disorderly conduct, health and safety violations as being tenant fault causes to non-renew or evict. And again, that's just getting granular versus having sort of larger buckets of definition. Relocation assistance is not provided in Jersey. And then there is an exemption that law may not apply to 2 or 3 unit owner occupied premises with 2 or fewer rental units. That was just taken out of the statute. It's a little confusing the way it's written. Jumping over to Los Angeles. So, and this is just pointing out some different features. Los Angeles is pretty similar to the Chicago proposal. Relocation assistance is actually much higher in Los Angeles. They also add a HUD exception if there's going to be a conversion to HUD housing or a conversion to affordable housing as being a good cause, a good no fault cause. There is also a more detailed tenant fault list than the Chicago proposal. Things like failing to provide reasonable access to the unit, a clause if the person's at the end of their lease, a person in the unit is a subtenant that has not been approved. That was something that I think was brought up by Ms. Payton. That could be listed specifically as it is in Los Angeles. And just to note, all public housing in the United States, as well as all housing that's funded by low-income housing tax credits, which is the majority of affordable housing in the United States, have good cause requirements. The LAHTC process was codified in law in 1990. Since its inception, it's had good cause requirements. And again, everybody that lives in CHA housing or HAC housing, anything that's public housing, has good cause requirements for eviction or non-renewal as well. In the LAHTC, that's a low-income housing tax credit context. The requirements sort of vary across different states. But I just want to kind of point out that that's, it's not a terribly radically new or innovative idea. It's existed for quite some time. I think Jonathan's back up for the switcheroo.
All right, I will raise the microphone and stand right next to it this time. We'll talk a little bit about how Just Cause benefits tenants and some ways that it can also benefit landlords as well. So Just Cause is a tenant-focused concept, and it is clearly beneficial to tenants in a number of ways, some of which we've talked about, and I don't want to repeat ourselves too much, but it prevents and mitigates the impact of mass displacement where there's a change in building ownership. I think that was mentioned in several of the comments. We've had some of those situations arise in Evanston recently. Just Cause reduces the ability of landlords to retaliate against tenants who complain about repair issues in their property. I think that was another subject of a comment today, or for unlawful landlord conduct. Similarly, it reduces the ability of landlords to discriminate against tenants based on racial or ethnic identity, immigration status, gender identity, or a number of other protected classes. The reason it reduces retaliation and discrimination is that it requires landlords to identify a reason why the tenancy is being terminated. Speaking as someone who does a lot of work in eviction court, those are the cases that really prick up our ears about retaliation and discrimination, where a tenant has complained about something or has had some interactions with the landlord around their identity, and then they get a non-renewal shortly thereafter. And under the current state of affairs, landlords don't have to prove anything in those cases. They just have to say, hey, we didn't renew their lease, they didn't move out. Just Cause promotes a clear mutual understanding of obligations between the landlord and the tenant, and gives the tenant an opportunity to identify and correct breaches of those obligations. The landlord has to give the tenant notice, hey, this is what you've done wrong. And they have to give them an opportunity to fix the problem if it can be fixed. Just Cause also promotes increased security in tenant housing. If a tenant pays their rent and abides by their lease, they can reasonably expect to stay in their home unless the landlord wants to change the use of the property. It promotes stable, connected communities where tenants can expect to stay in place and become integrated into their neighborhoods. And it ensures that when good tenants are required to move, they get sufficient notice to do so and support to avoid the harms of sudden unexpected displacement. We heard from several folks today who are facing displacement late in life with limited resources, and we heard how hard that is for them. So how does Just Cause benefit landlords? Obviously, it's mostly beneficial to tenants. That's the focus of the policy, but there also are a number of ways in which it benefits both large and small landlords here. Just Cause reduces the likelihood of retaliation or discrimination claims by promoting clarity around the reasons why a tenancy is being terminated. It's helpful to both parties to have that clarity and avoids legal liability. Just Cause also promotes tenant investment in stable long-term relationships with their landlord, their neighbors in the building. If they can expect to stay in place, they're going to build those relationships over time. Just Cause creates powerful incentives for tenants to avoid violations. If a tenant has an expectation that they can stay in place in housing that they like, they're going to be very careful about violating their lease or violating the law, because doing so is one of the few reasons that they could be required to leave if the use of the building is staying the same. And it creates incentives to move when Just Cause requires them to do that, because in a number of areas, relocation assistance is provided. And tenants also want to avoid eviction proceedings, which can negatively impact their rental record. Finally, Just Cause reduces the number of no-cause eviction filings, which are both costly to landlords and reduce the efficiency of the court system. I think several people have mentioned non-renewal as a way to avoid eviction court. In fact, non-renewal simply creates another reason why tenants end up in eviction court when they don't move out after the lease is not renewed. And I can tell you, having litigated probably upwards of 500 eviction cases, those cases take just as long as 4-clause cases to litigate. So taking those out of the court system will, make judicial resources available for the cases that really do need the judge's attention, where there is a cause for the eviction to be taking place. Research has shown that in 4 cities where Just Cause was implemented, there was a significant reduction in eviction and eviction filing rates. I've included a link to that paper if the committee wants to review that at their leisure. And I think that's all we have.
All right. I'm going to open it up to comment. I know Council Member Reed had some comments he wanted to make.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as the council member who made this referral as the lead sponsor on this, I'm one, I think it's important that I'm really glad that we got an opportunity to hear the voices of tenants this evening, which are voices that we tend not to hear. And I'm also glad that we got to hear the voices of property owners, and there were some concerns shared. And I do believe that the vast majority of the concerns that were shared were certainly addressed by this presentation. Again, there's nothing in this ordinance, whether in the proposal or what hopefully will be before this committee soon, that would not allow someone to evict someone for just cause if they're, for example, Ms. Thomas or Thompson. I don't know if you're still here in the audience somewhere, but you asked someone to address your concern about a tenant who was smoking tobacco within the unit, and it seems as though your lease would have prohibited that. And so given that, that's a violation of the lease, and that is a just cause, particularly when we have smoke-free laws. That is a just cause to evict someone. Nuisances, other nuisances are just causes to evict someone. So what I want to propose is there are a number of questions that we need to answer. And I just spoke to the tenants at the Avador as they were walking out. And, folks across our city are looking for action on this sooner than later. We cannot hold off on this. And so what I'm proposing is that we create a short-term task force comprised of folks from the housing advocacy community, landlords, and as was requested, I think that housing providers, residential housing providers need to be a part of that. Tenants, if they are able to join, members of this committee, of course. And I believe we should come back in October with a draft ordinance that is ready for this committee to adopt and move forward to council. This will mean that some of the updates to our inclusionary housing ordinance may have to be put on hold temporarily because of until January because of staff resources. But I think it's critically important that we move forward with this. I think it's important that we move forward with this to ensure that there is regional cohesion with Chicago. I don't think we need to wait on Chicago, and I don't think we need to mirror Chicago's ordinance verbatim. But I do think we should create some cohesion within the region to have these protections. I want to address a few things. Someone said, one of the residential providers said, they want to see this committee and other committees work on items that will make Evanston a place that is more friendly to invest. First, I want to say that my goal is to make Evanston the most livable community, not necessarily the most investable community. But with that, we have a proposal that the council will be taking final vote on next week or at our next meeting that will reduce parking minimums, which was mentioned as a barrier to development, in a half-mile radius around all train stations. There's much more to go, but that will help reduce barriers to development in our city. There's a mention, there seemed to be a conflation about Just Cause wanting, the goal of Just Cause being to create more affordability in our community. There's a landlord or property owner who mentioned that, and it's not about affordability, it's about stability. And so I want to highlight that. But I think we can come back, we can have a thoughtful discussion with the various stakeholders or with representatives of the various stakeholder groups, come back by October with a draft ordinance that the full body can consider and move forward to council. I think certainly I know from some of my colleagues who are not here, and certainly everyone who is here, I think we understand the need for a Just Cause ordinance. We understand that in some way, in some fashion, we need to create stronger protections for tenants. I think that's uncontroverted here. Maybe it's not, because I'm seeing a light go on. But certainly, I think we understand the need for protections here. I think we're going to have to get into a conversation about some of the details. I think carve-outs for smaller residential providers might make sense for folks who live in their units. I think we can be really thoughtful about this. And so I would move that we create a short-term committee that will come back in October with a ordinance for this committee to consider. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you.
Can we have a discussion?
We can have a discussion on it.
Thank you. We have had a couple of months to think about what was put in front of us. And it obviously is very controversial. There are two sides to it. And the document presented to this committee was a document drafted by tenant advocacy, which it's totally fine. But I think that should be enough time for us to try to find a balance. If we want to be in a livable community, it has to be for everybody. And I totally see a lot of aspects that are good about this particular issue of the ordinance, Just Cause. But I also see a lot of controversy. Just in the conversation that we had today, we had flips are not good cause, but major rehab is. So what is a flip and what is a major rehab? There is controversy on that, on the language presented to us. So I think that trying to rush, I'm going to wait for the proposer of the motion.
My apologies.
Present. Okay. I think that trying to rush this is not a good move for this committee or the subcommittee. I think that the subcommittee should meet and then create a timeline that it's doable for that committee. I think that for us to dictate that it needs to be back by October to be voted on and to be then submitted to the whole chamber council of the city, I think that we're rushing things. I think that there is a lot more conversation that needs to be had in order to create something that it's valid for everybody, not just trying to appease things. Because we can talk about by evicting somebody. We don't evict people just for the sake of eviction. Landlords evict people because their tenants are doing something that is wrong. And I'm not taking away the fact that we have whatever word you use, and I forgot your name, from the North Shore condos, about the companies that are buying big multi-unit buildings, that all they have in mind is pleasing their shareholders. And the only way to please a shareholder is by making them more money. That's it. We see it across the board. It's not just in housing. So we need to be able to address those things as much as we are addressing the needs of the tenants, because I totally see that we need to protect. They're probably the most vulnerable sector of our community, but also we don't want to harm the housing providers, the ones that take care of the house that they're in. And there's gotta be a balance. And I think that we're beginning a conversation here, and it's good to have it. We should get to one place that is good for everybody. That's my comment to your motion.
So I know Councilmember Reed wants to respond, but I want to see if anybody else would like to opine on this.
I like the idea of having more meetings with community members to get some clarity around what's going on. I don't know if that would be worked out by October. I'm a little uncomfortable putting a firm and fast date. I do agree there's a sense of urgency. I think one of the biggest things that I think we're seeing, at least from where I'm sitting, I totally get from the housing provider point of view that when there are changes, there's some unease over what's to come. A lot of and I've had people approach me outside asking me specifics around just cause. And I think probably one of the semantics of what's an eviction, what's a non-renewal, I think people get caught up in the language of it. So there's people in the discussion I had, I think there is some unease around what is cause. And I think a lot of the examples that the housing providers provided, said, we wouldn't non-renew without telling someone. And when, the elderly community members came up, I think everyone in the room was like, well, that really stinks. That's not right. But the examples you gave for non-renewal for bad tenants, you'd still be able to do that. And I think there's, we have the example I heard on next door that if someone's smoking, you can't non-renew. You can non-renew. That's a just cause. So I think there's a lot of community engagement that needs to happen around, because I think truly, I feel the people in this room would not be affected by these changes. And I get why you're worried. Personally, I think if you're living in the unit and you have 1 or 2 units and you're living in the building, should probably be exempt. If I'm not a housing provider, but if I found my upstairs renter annoying and just annoying for no reason, I live in the building, I should be able to say yeah, I'm not going to renew. But if you have 6 units, you're not living there, that's not right. So I think, I don't know if that answers the question around the task force, but I think we do need to have these discussions, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions over what qualifies in this case.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to both of my colleagues on this committee for your concerns and raising a concern around a timeline. The concerns, Councilmember Hidikotis, that you raised and that you, Hugo, raised are exactly why I think we need a timeline to come back with something that is written because there's so much confusion out there and there's misconceptions about what this ordinance is or what just cause is and what it's not. Well, the reason is because there is no ordinance that people can look to and definitively say, this is what's in the law, this is what is not in the law. And I think we have to, there are some key questions that we have to answer around things that you brought up there about, are we going to exempt folks who have, if someone has a 2 or 3 flat and, lives in the unit themselves? Are we going to ensure protections around what, it justifies a non-renewal in certain cases? Are we going to figure out, determine, are we going to provide smaller residential providers with, assistance to help with relocation assistance? Are we going to exempt them from relocation having to provide relocation assistance? And I think we need to answer all of those questions. And I think, I want to remind us that today is July 18th. We're pretty much July 19th. And we have some time between now and our October meeting to answer those questions, get something on paper that folks can look at in the community and actually judge, and then bring that back to this committee. And nothing would stop this committee from taking more time to, look at the details. But I think we have to get something to this committee sooner than later. Also, we need to start checking things off of our plate because we have a huge agenda in front of us and we have limited staff time and we need to start moving through this. And so I would look to lead up that committee, and I can guarantee you we can have a solid ordinance in front of this committee by our October meeting that folks can feel comfortable either moving forward to council or taking more time to consider, but we need to have something written sooner than later. And so I would encourage all of my colleagues to vote to support the motion to create this committee, this task force, and then support having at least a first draft back by October.
I would like to comment on this as well. I very strongly believe that a committee with both housing providers and tenants and committee members and staff makes sense. I think I agree with some of the comments that you stated that there has to be a balance. I don't necessarily agree that October is reasonable. But I do think if the motion that you've put out there is both for creating a subcommittee or a task force and bringing this to committee on October, is that part of your motion, Councilmember Reed?
Yes. My expectation is that we could have a draft ordinance before this committee for October meeting.
Could I make that?
And if I may, just to answer your question there, I've, as a council member, I have worked on legislation in many different areas. I've actually been the council member who's introduced the most legislation and passed the most legislation. I fully believe, I've checked in with staff, that it is not unreasonable or impossible or a burden to staff to be able to come back with an ordinance with a draft ordinance for our October meeting. I think in order to dispel much of the confusion that is out in the community, we need something that is in front of this committee that folks can actually judge and truly criticize whether or not, their concerns are met by the ordinance. Thank you.
You go.
Thank you. I'd like to make a suggestion that perhaps we can modify your motion to say that the task force will be created by our next meeting, having one meeting already on that task force, and let that task force determine what their timelines would be.
I am fine with that. I would ask, I would like to chair the task force and ensure that we are moving at a timely fashion. I'm fine letting the task force itself come up with its timeline.
All right, before we go to a vote, does anybody else on the committee have any other comments?
So I say, are we not having an August meeting? Did I read the prior?
That is correct.
Yeah,
Your
so-
August meeting is canceled, so the quickest we would be able to provide a report back would be the September meeting.
And so how does staff feel about a timeline? They are overburdened already.
To be completely frank, Councilmember Reed is correct. We have a lot of things on our to-do list coming up. And so, you know, the longer this discussion related to Just Cause continues, the more that work is going to pile up and not be able to move forward. So for example, the inclusionary housing ordinance is something that by city code is required to be looked at every 2 years. We're already a year behind on that. And so this is going to create additional delays on that project being able to advance to the committee, just because of the fact that there are so many regular orders of business that you have to deal with for the months to come. So I do think it's important for us to move this forward. And I think that we could definitely provide a report back on the task force in October in terms of the status of that work. A lot of this is going to depend on who's on that task force, their availability during the summer months. And so I guess I'm trying to say, yes, it is going to be a lift for staff, but it's just the work that we're doing. It's just different work.
Go ahead, Hugo.
Thank you. For the record, I'd like to clarify that this is the first meeting where we discuss Just Cause. We have been talking about the landlord-tenant ordinance in our previous meeting. So I think that given the importance and relevance of the topic, it deserves the time. And either through the task force or back to the committee, we should give it the time. And September is a much better timeline for that committee or task force to have a meeting performed with, where that task force is going to determine what their next steps would be.
Point of order. What I'm proposing is that the task force would be separate. It's a subsidiary of this committee, but separate of this committee. And so we wouldn't be bound by whether or not this committee is meeting in August. So certainly the task force could have meetings in August, meetings in September, meetings in October before this meeting. And so that would provide plenty of opportunity. And I'll note that the Open Meetings Act, depending on the number of members from this committee that we have, would not apply to that task force. And so we would not have to have a quorum necessarily. We could have our experts come in, share testimony and feedback and make decisions and move forward.
Thank you. Any other comment? Chloe?
I just have a brief question. Thank you, Councilmember Reed, for this. I was just wondering very briefly if you could comment on how providers and community members would be selected for the task force, just given the sort of the time frame and also the sort of the known challenges, particularly of sort of outreach to the types of community members who would sort of be the most likely to be affected by these ordinances.
Yeah, my proposal is that we have an open call of any member here that would like to join the task force. And then from there, we would allow, community members to be a part of it. We can, whether we give those members, voting power or not is up to us. But I think that really what we'll be going through is hearing feedback about individual proponents of the ordinance, coming to common sense, consensus around bits that we can and other bits that we can't can be solved here at the committee or at council.
All right. I don't know if you want to restate your motion.
Yeah, I would move that we authorize a short term, or that we authorize a task force to come back to this committee with both a report and an ordinance on a just cause eviction ordinance. That is my motion.
I might just amend that, what the subcommittee or task force would be made up of.
I would suggest that I would ask to be chair of that committee, and then we would allow any member of this body to join as a voting member, and then allow members of the committee to join as non-voting members.
All right. I guess we had it moved and seconded, so we would do a roll call vote.
Sure.
Can we restate the motion, please? I'm not.
Yes, I will restate it. So I move that we create a short-term committee to come back, or short-term task force to come back to this committee with a just cause eviction ordinance and report. I propose that I ask to be chair of that committee, and that any member of this committee may join as a voting member, and any member of the community may join as a non-voting member.
Any more clarification?
Yeah, well, you're just good. So there's no limit to the number of people who could be on it. And who's going to make the final decision?
Well,
so anybody who says they're interested can be on it.
So
from the community.
Members of this committee would be voting members and
Yeah,
have ultimate.
right. But anybody
power.
from the community.
And anyone that, just like anyone can join
So
in.
we could have 50 people, right? I mean,
so
yeah.
I'm not trying to intervene here, but.
I'm sorry, but we can't accept any more.
To be clear, a
public comment.
non-voting member is a member that just gets regular updates, would be on the calendar invites, would get notifications of the meeting and have the ability to chime in during the meeting, but would be a non-voting member.
Marion, do you have a point of clarification?
I wanted to add that anything above 2 committee members participating in the task force would prompt the Open Meeting Act, which would definitely add quite a bit of burden on staff as far as minutes and meetings. So I just want to mention that. And then
Just to that point, how many members do we have on this committee?
9.
So I can tell you that the council is 10. With including the mayor, and that quorum there is 5 members, and a majority of quorum is 4. So in this case, we could have up to 3 members now that we have 9 members on any committee without triggering Open Meetings Act.
I'll need to verify that. I trust your judgment, but I will want to verify that with legal. The other thing that I wanted to suggest for clarification is there are options to do a task force with committee members and have workshops and specific meetings open to community members so that they can participate and the committee can work, but the task force can work with them without them necessarily having to be part full-time of a task force. Sometimes it helps, especially to be able to reach to people and to get people to participate that are not able to commit to the level of commitment this task force
Which
would
is why
require.
we make them non-voting members.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that.
I have one question here. So, could this be done by having another, community engagement meeting around an ordinance app? Like, we could take a straw poll tonight as to what parts we think where we want to lean, and then have or not take one tonight, but or we can have staff organize another meeting specifically with like landlords and tenants and, our advocates, and then, and that way, some of us can come to that. We wouldn't have the minutes requirement, but we could gather information to see and also answer questions. That would, I think, kind of point staff to where we are heading as a committee. And that's,
I think that would be accomplished through the task force. So if maybe we can clarify this a bit here. I know you're a new member, but you have an academic background. Would you be interested in joining the task force? Is that something you think you have time to do?
I would need to consult my
Consult,
calendar.
okay. And Ugo, this sounds like something you certainly would want to be a part of the task force. Is there anyone else here that, you know, has a definitive and yeah, so I think if we can stick with these three members here, myself, Ugo, and Ms. Salome, we would hopefully not trigger OMA at that point. And we could have task force meetings and hear feedback. I will note, I think both of you are residential housing providers. Is that correct? Landlords. You're both. So I want to say that we'll have two landlords, represented on this committee. I am a tenant. We will have representatives from, housing providers and other representatives from tenant advocacy organizations, as well as other housing providers that will be invited to participate in our meeting. But I think that maybe will provide some clarity. I didn't ask the chair if you were interested, but
that's
yeah,
okay.
I think we've found our three.
All right.
We have one more quick.
I have a quick question. Is just cause an ordinance by itself, or it's part of the ordinance of the landlord tenant?
The idea is that we move this as an ordinance on its own. It is, that's what I.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just to clarify, staff is proposing that in September, an ordinance would be presented with the items that this committee has discussed thus far, including the items that we need to get through yet tonight. Yep. And that would be presented to you in September. The just cause, and I think there are three other items that staff is recommending take a longer time so that more outreach and input can be proposed.
It sounds like you're saying that the just cause would not be its own ordinance and that
It would be its own.
It would be.
It would be its own ordinance. correct?
Suggesting. Oh, okay.
And we're deciding that tonight.
Uh,
It sounds very arbitrary to
Well, that-
me.
The staff recommended those three items be pulled out. So we're just prioritizing just cause with the task force. So
We're actually not, we're essentially deprioritizing and prioritizing the other ordinances to move forward, and then taking more time with just cause and not lumping it in with the other ordinances that we're prepared to move forward with in September.
All right. So please restate the motion. I think.
All right. So I propose that we create a task force to draft an ordinance to bring back to this committee and report on just cause eviction that would include Joanne Salome, Ugo Rodriguez, and myself as committee members or as task force members. And then we would we would include housing providers as well as tenant advocates and tenants and others in that task force process to draft an ordinance for this committee.
All right. Just looking to staff to make sure we're good for going forward with a roll call vote. It's been seconded.
Okay, so you're seconding this specific motion because you've,
You're saying because we have to re-second it because it's a new motion. Okay, yes, I am seconding this restated motion.
okay, so then I'll proceed to roll call. Chair Feingold,
Aye.
Councilmember Herrick Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Ugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zalomi,
Aye.
Chloe Thurston. Aye. The motion passes.
All right. I don't know if anybody else has specific questions beyond this particular motion about the presentation that we saw. If there's any questions for our guests. I do have a question myself, which is procedural, to understand how a landlord if they feel they have a just cause, how that gets processed. It sounds like if their tenant doesn't agree and doesn't leave, and assuming a non-renewal is a just cause, they're forced to go to eviction court.
So if there is.
Do you want to step to the microphone?
And when we're speaking about just cause, we're not speaking about any particular ordinance right now, but just under the present law, any for-cause eviction case where the tenant has either not paid rent or they've violated the lease or violated some other law, they would get a notice of termination saying either you haven't paid rent and you need to pay rent within a certain period of time, or you violated your lease in some way. You've got a certain period of time to correct that issue if it can be corrected. And if the tenant does not pay the money or correct the issue, then the tenancy is terminated and the landlord has the option then of filing an eviction case that would then proceed in court and could result in an eviction order being entered by the court, and the tenant could be displaced by the sheriff if they don't move out before that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Reed, you have a comment? Anyone else have any clarification or questions about the presentation?
I have a related clarification. So just to one of the questions one of the sort of hypotheticals that's come up a lot are these disturbances that are difficult to show or prove. So smoking came up as one example. What would be the process for proving sort of a disturbance that's, would there need to be photographic evidence? Like what are the standards there? I'm just curious.
No, I mean, so the landlord's testimony or the landlord's agent's testimony would be evidence of the disturbance. And then the tenant could provide their own evidence, which could be their own testimony that that was not the case. And then the finder of fact, whether that be the judge or a jury, would determine who was more credible and, whether an eviction should proceed under a preponderance of the evidence standard. 51% more credible, you win. The landlord may have other evidence. There may be photographic evidence. There may be documentary evidence, evidence of communications. All of these are things that I think the suggestion sounded a little bit like in the comments, like if the tenant denied it, then they would not be evicted. I can tell you that's not the case.
And to be clear, just cause this ordinance, either the existence of it or lack of it wouldn't change those standards. These are the standards of evidence regardless. And so in that same scenario with the status quo, there'd still need to be, the same level of evidence.
Just in triers of fact, generally judges and juries in the eviction process tend to give a lot of leeway to housing providers. So I hear a lot of kind of, moaning and groaning, and the process typically, is not one where, the landlord would have to do tons of, bring in tons of evidence. That's generally not the way the system works.
All right. So do we have any other comments from the committee? Or any other discussion? This is a discussion item. We're not voting on this tonight, obviously. All right. We can move on.
So I'll move continuation of discussion of potential changes to the city's landlord-tenant ordinance.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Oh, no, just the motion second.
Sorry. All right. The final item on the agenda is to finalize the discussion regarding potential changes to the city's landlord-tenant ordinance. And I'm assuming that's a presentation from staff.
While she's pulling that up, I'm just gonna, what we're gonna do is go through the 5 remaining topics. And then we'll open it up for discussion. Previously, we've been going topic by topic, but just in the interest of time this evening, I'd like staff to be able to present all 5 of the remaining topics. And then if there's any discussion, clarification, or changes to what staff is recommending, that's where I'm hoping we can have the committee discussion.
So that's fine.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lindsay Wade. I'm a housing and economic development analyst here at the City of Evanston, and I'd like to speak with you all about our recommendations in regards to 5 of the updates to the residential landlord-tenant ordinance. Specifically, those are one-time right to pay and stay, collection of attorney fees, the topic of gendered violence, and some laws that protect survivors of gendered violence, the right to organize, bolstering that, and right of first refusal.
A point of order, and my apologies, just in interest of time, I want to suggest that of those topics, I think some of those may be uncontroverted amongst this committee, and maybe there's 1 or 2 of them where there is some controversy, and maybe we can just pull those out and vote forward on the things that are uncontroversial and not have to have a presentation on it, given the hour.
Would you like to suggest what those items are?
I would.
Or would you like staff?
Personally, I am supportive of what staff has recommended on all of these, but if my colleagues have any, having reviewed the packet, have any concerns, particularly I think the last item, if you can repeat it again, which was
Right of first refusal.
right of first refusal. I heard that mentioned in public comment. There might be some issue there. So maybe that's one that we can pull out and have a presentation on. Is there another item that the gendered issues, the violence issues, I don't think are ones that we have controversy with.
Lindsay, can you just read the 5 of them again off?
One-time right to pay and stay, collection of attorney fees. It's connected with the aforementioned. Gendered violence, specifically bringing visibility to the Illinois Safe Homes Act and the Violence Against Women Act. Those are already state and federal laws. Then we have right to organize. We currently protect tenants who are forming or have formed tenant organizations or associations. However, there are additional items that we would like to add to our ordinance to bolster exercising those rights. And then we have right of first refusal.
Yeah, a couple of them, I think you can go through pretty quickly, so I'd rather.
Yeah, let's move forward. You may not have to go through the whole presentation, but just give us the basic outline of each provision.
Sure. So we have one-time right to pay and stay. Essentially, as the ordinance currently stands, landlords can move forward with an eviction notice once it's filed, even if tenants pay all of their past due rent prior to a judgment. Between the time that an eviction is filed and the time when a judgment is made, tenants are often seeking emergency rent assistance, which if the tenant is working with a charitable organization can take 1 or 2 months. We want to give tenants the chance to get all of their past due rent paid instead of just getting evicted either way. This isn't something that could happen again and again. If any future non-payment were to occur by the tenant, the eviction process would proceed as usual. On the following slide, I have an example of language that we would incorporate into our existing ordinance. Next, we have collection of attorney fees. So we would like to exempt tenants from the generality of having the prevailing party pay, having the prevailing party's attorney fees paid by the non-prevailing party. So essentially roughly 82% of eviction cases are for non-payment, and only 11% of tenants have representation in eviction court. We recognize that the standing provision inherently penalizes tenants, particularly low-income persons, by increasing the debt incurred while facing challenges to rehouse themselves. And we seek to reduce this power imbalance between landlords and tenants by exempting tenants should an eviction judgment be made from having to pay their landlord's attorney fees. And on this slide, you can see an example of the language that we would intend to incorporate into our ordinance. I would like to point out that filing fees and processing fees would still have to be paid by the tenant should the landlord be prevailing in an eviction case. Next, we have a couple of additions that we would, or a couple of laws that we would like to highlight in our existing ordinance. Those are the Illinois Safe Homes Act and the Violence Against Women Act. The Illinois Safe Homes Act allows survivors seeking safety to terminate their lease within 3 days' notice and or to request their landlord change their locks within 48 hours. Tenants are required to provide a new key to the landlord within 48 hours if they decide to change it themselves due to landlord inaction. The VAWA, or Violence Against Women Act, seeks to protect HUD-subsidized domestic violence victims from accessing housing and from facing eviction or certain lease violations due to being survivors of domestic violence. Specifically, we seek to protect them from retaliations should they decide to seek emergency assistance and services. On this slide, you all can see we would essentially copy the existing language from the state law and from the federal law and paste that language into our existing ordinance. Finally, we have, well, not finally, sorry, there's two more. We have right to organize. So we currently protect tenants who are forming an organization or an association from retaliation from their landlord. However, we would like to add additional protections for tenant associations. Specifically, we would like to protect tenants from retaliation for passing out leaflets as they relate to forming a tenant association, and to protect tenants from retaliation should they decide to use a common space within the building to host meetings. These are tools that promote tenant organizing and has been shown to generally be effective in improving landlord and tenant relationships. And here is an example of what that would look like in our existing ordinance. It's a highlighted information. Finally, we have the right of first refusal. Right of first refusal helps to reduce housing turnover, preserve the affordable housing stock, maintain community diversity, and create opportunities for rentership, homeownership, and economic development by giving tenants an exclusive opportunity to purchase their building. The law right now is to give tenants of condo conversion buildings the opportunity to purchase their unit. We'd like to extend that same opportunity to tenants of buildings being sold regardless of whether or not they're going to become condos. I understand this is very long. However, this is our existing ordinance as it stands in our condominium regulations ordinance, which follows a residential landlord tenant ordinance in our municipal code. And this is what it would look like.
Thank you. Councilmember Reed?
Yeah, I do think that there are at least three of those that may not have universal support here, but enough to move forward and for it to come back as in September. So I would move that we recommend the adoption of the staff recommendations relating to the Violence Against Women Act, the right to organize, and the right to pay and stay, the one-time right to pay and stay.
So
So it moves, yeah,
that's a
move staff
motion?
recommendations to come back in September on those 3 items.
Can you repeat the 3 items, please?
The item relating to the Violence Against Women Act, codifying protections for domestic violence survivors, the right to organize, and the one-time right to pay and stay.
Do I have a second?
Come back to it.
I'm moving staff recommendations on those items.
Second.
Thank you.
Is
What? Sorry.
Oh. Okay, we would want a roll call vote for this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Chair Feingold,
Aye.
Councilmember Eric Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Nay.
Joanne Zolomie,
Aye.
Chloe's Thurston. Aye. 5-0-1, the motion passes.
So that would leave us with the right of first refusal and what is the last item? Attorney's fees, yes. So
All
that,
right. Oh, go ahead.
in that, I would, I guess I'll move that we adopt staff recommendations for attorney's fees, and certainly we can have a debate about that. There needs to be
I'll second.
Okay.
Can I have a roll call vote?
Oh, well, we'll allow. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. The problem I have with that is that the landlord is being forced to take someone to court for this person who is not paying their rent or damaging the property or doing whatever is allowed for a landlord to ask somebody to leave their building after their lease is up, or if there is a breach of the lease or no payment of rent before that. So the landlord now is not collecting rent and it's paying an attorney. I think that maybe we can find a point of balance on this. And perhaps it'd be caps on what an attorney could charge, because, you know, we don't want him to ride the wave either. But also, I think that there should be some compensation. Some landlords are punished by not collecting the rent. And many times that rent doesn't come complete. If the eviction is granted, the judge doesn't say you have to pay the rent. You have to leave. So it's 3 or 4 months that landlord is being dragged without getting the rent. So it's very difficult. And I totally hear that there might be some instances where this is not just to the tenant, but the majority of the time, if I'm not paying my obligation, I have to pay the consequences. So I have a problem from that perspective. And I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that, but I would like to hear other opinions.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. I appreciate the concerns there, but I think you highlighted something important there. Usually, you know, from the time someone first is, 10 days in Evanston late on rent to the point of eviction is maybe a 3 or 4 month process. Could be longer, and especially, during COVID, but 3 or 4 months sounds about right. And just like with any other industry, there is a housing provider, residential rental provider insurance. There's landlord insurance, and that insurance typically covers, and you may know more about it than I do, but I believe it covers typically up to 3 months of past due rent. Does anyone disagree with that?
Yes.
So
Yes, there is not such a thing.
there's certainly landlord insurance, and it's not a non-existent thing. In fact, if folks, hold on, please calm down.
Please.
I would imagine if folks in this room don't know about it, it's something that we need to do a better job of educating folks on, but there certainly is insurance for residential rental providers. And that insurance in many cases covers a few months of past due rent, from my understanding. And so I think we can look more into that. And to your question about potentially limiting attorney's fees, I don't believe we have the constitutional authority to do that in the city of Evanston, but what we can
I'm
do.
not saying to limit what the attorney wants to.
Okay,
charge.
a
I'm
limit.
saying to limit what the tenant could be responsible.
Sure. Okay. Yes. And that's what I was going to suggest, that, I'm not saying I agree with that approach, but potentially a route could be that, the renter doesn't have to cover more than doesn't have to cover more than a certain amount.
Are there any more comments or questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the landlord should be responsible for something, again, if the tenant hasn't been paying for several months, you're just still have your expenses to pay, you still have a mortgage to pay and anything else that you're paying for, water or whatever. So, I know, it's an additional financial burden for tenants, but does the court work out a payment plan on that? I haven't. No, you just.
A judge, and please, maybe we can have one of our attorneys answer this, but
Yeah.
certainly a judge can enter an order that that allows the residential rental provider to seek payment on the outstanding balance.
For the rental balance? Yes, so evictions can be filed either as what's called a single action, where the landlord is only seeking possession of the property, or as a joint action where a claim for rent is joined to the claim for possession. So if the landlord is successful in that case, they would get both an order for possession and also a judgment for the rent that they can then, take all the actions to collect a judgment that any litigant can take to collect a judgment. Oh, and just, it was in the presentation. I just wanted to make sure the council is aware that this limitation on attorney's fees is already present in the Cook County ordinance and in the Chicago ordinance. So Evanston is right now an outlier in not having that protection.
Yeah, particularly without Evanston being an outlier in the county ordinance. Again, I think regional cohesion is important. I would encourage us to move forward with the adoption of this. It seems to be a new standard locally.
But if our aim is to create a livable community, then is it that really what we're achieving just because Cook County has it or Chicago has it? Do we need to follow their example? You just said a few minutes earlier that we don't need to follow their lead. We can create our own community here.
Totally agreed that we do not need to follow the lead of Chicago or Cook County all the time. But I do think that there generally is an argument for, having a clear set of standards, particularly when it comes to housing rights across the region. It ensures people are transient. We know that a large number of Evanstonians are renters, and they're moving back and forth between sometimes Evanston, Chicago, and other places. We want to make sure that folks have a clear understanding of what they're responsible for and what they are not across the region.
Any other comments before we vote? All right. Yes, please restate the.
So we are voting on adopting staff's recommendation. And to be clear, what we're voting on is not adopting this, but adopting this recommendation to come back to us for an actual vote in September. We can, so to be clear, that's what we're suggesting. And so I move that we ask staff to bring back the recommendations here for our September meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote.
Chair Feingold,
Aye.
Councilmember Eric Gars,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zolome,
Aye.
Chloe Thurston.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-1.
And then finally, I will move that we adopt staff record, that we ask staff to bring back the recommendations for the right of first refusal in ordinance form for our September meeting.
Second.
Comments, questions, discussion?
I'm a landlord. I'm a realtor. I have been president of a condo association, and in the bylaws, there was right of first refusal, which condos rarely use that right, and most new condo association bylaws don't even include that, as I don't think. Anyway, don't tie the hands of the landlord. If the landlord decides to sell and the tenant can say, yes, I'm interested, but any seller wants to present the property to the greatest number of potential buyers. And if the landlord, the landlord could say, oh, sure, I'd be willing to sell it to you. We'll do an appraisal. And if they can come to an agreement, that's fine. Otherwise, the seller wants to have the greatest number of potential buyers looking at that. So there's nothing now to prevent a tenant from buying the property if the landlord and they agree. But don't put that onus on us. Give us the right to decide. We've put a lot of our financial, investment in this property, and we want to get a fair return when we sell it. So don't tie our hands, because there's nothing to prevent a tenant from buying a property now.
Councilmember Reed. Hugo Rodriguez.
I think that for a condominium case, it works if the tenant really wants to buy the unit. But when it's for a larger property, you're either ready financially or you're not. And I think that the way it was presented, the timelines that it requires are such that the potential buyer that landlord might have for their property is going to walk away because he can't wait for 3 months, 6 months, or whatever the proposed timeline there. I think that it's too limited for landlords, and I definitely don't agree the way it's written, at least.
I'll go back to that again. Sorry.
Thank you. My understanding, is this something either of our experts are able to speak to, Dominic?
So the largest right to first refusal model that exists, at a municipal level that I'm aware of is in Washington, D.C. It's existed since 1980 or so there. The law wasn't even really mechanically used for a couple of decades after it was first passed, because oftentimes, and this law exists now just applying to multifamily buildings. It is a somewhat paradigmatic shift. I think if the, committee is thinking about a lot of large paradigmatic shifts, that, this is an additional one. We already have some controversy, I know, on some other pieces, but that's just my 2 cents. But the right of first refusal, in that context requires, I think in DC, something like a 60-day notice of intent to sell. It sets a timeline and process. There was no infrastructure when that law was passed. And since there has been an infrastructure built that helps tenants organize into some sort of legal entity to potentially purchase the property, there's also the right to assign their right of first refusal to nonprofits or other, actually not limited to nonprofits in DC, but that's really the only mechanism that allows most tenants to be able to, you could assign it to a CDC and they could, make that housing affordable. For instance, there's a similar law that exists in San Francisco, but it's the actual city that has the first right of refusal. And generally those go to a list of pre-screened affordable housing providers. So these were conversations we had around, potential strengthening of ways for tenants to, have stronger rights and increase affordable housing stock, particularly in this case. So that's where the idea comes from.
Thank you. I do believe, and Dominic, if you can indicate with maybe a head nod, but I do believe that in some cases, right of first refusal has been tied into just cause eviction ordinances. Am I incorrect on that? Okay. I wonder, I'd ask I see a few lights are popping on. I'm curious to hear if there's a concern maybe around the time period. Is 120 days? Is that the concern? I know Ms. Salome, you have, if it's just generally, hey, I believe I should be able to sell to whoever I want to, that is one concern, but I would again just highlight that, we're talking about obviously housing and not, fidget spinners. This is, create some stability for folks. I've heard in many cases of folks being evicted because their property has been sold and a new owner comes in and chooses to either evict or jack up rents or whatever the case may be. And I do believe there is an importance for the municipality to provide legal rights for tenants to be able to, where they have paid. Again, yes, the residential rental provider is the person who is using maybe some of their upfront capital to acquire the property, but who's really paying the property taxes? Who's paying for the maintenance? It's not the landlord. It is the tenants who are paying rent to the landlord, who are covering. Well, no. The tenant is providing the landlord with wealth. That is what is happening. The tenant is providing the landlord with wealth, and the landlord is leveraging their financial ability to acquire property and then charge other people to be able to make profit on the fact that they have enough wealth to acquire property in the first place. A lot of people refer to being.
I think we're deviating from the right of first refusal.
Well, no,
you're making comments that really are out of line.
I don't think it's the
like
truth.
I go
Sometimes
to a
folks do see the
restaurant
truth as.
And I tell the owner of the restaurant, I'm feeding your kids because I'm buying food here.
Yes,
that's not true.
The workers who are working at a restaurant
giving you are providing a service and a good
no,
to the tenants. So, but we're deviating from this. I think that the issue with first refusal, as I see it, and I think that the notice of intent to sell should be given. Absolutely. And if the tenants are organized, that they can buy the property, they should have. In the realistic world, is that if I have an offer from somebody to buy my property, and I gave under the contract a right of first refusal to a tenant, I show the tenant that offer, you match it in price, match it in all terms, including timing to buy it. That is a true right of first refusal. Second is that we have, please bear with me, I just lost my train of thought. It'll come back.
Okay, you got it?
I think so. I believe that if the tenants are organized enough to be able to buy the property, they should do it. Absolutely. They should match any offer that landlord or that property owner has at hand. And notice of intent to sell, absolutely. Here's what I was thinking of, is that a property conveys to the new owner with leases in place. The lease has nothing to do with the contract to sell or buy. The lease is a contract between the tenant and the property. So it's not that a new owner is going to come in and evict tenants because I'm buying the building. That doesn't exist. The leases go with the property, not with the landlord or the housing provider, whatever we call it now.
I'd like to give others an opportunity. Did you want to speak again, Councilmember Reed?
If there's anyone else.
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I would recommend that we move forward with this. I'm not hearing any specific amendments to staff's proposal to make improvements other than just flat out rejecting it. And I think that is certainly the right of some folks. But I am curious if there are amendments to this. If not, I think it might be time to call a vote on this.
I wouldn't be able to give them to you intelligently, because, this was presented to us Friday.
Yeah. So then certainly we'll have an opportunity between now and the next meeting to think about amendments, and I'd love to work with you on that.
All right. So we had a motion and a second, I believe. All right, roll call vote.
Chair Feingold,
Nay.
Councilmember Heracars.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zalomi,
No.
Chloe Thurston.
Aye.
So in the case of a tie that I think it moves forward without a recommendation, and this would come back to us, and then the full committee could vote on it at the next meeting.
Robert's rules say something about arm wrestling. No, I'm just kidding.
We can flip a coin, but I think what's appropriate is that when with the case of this tie, this will move forward, and then the full committee will vote on it in September. And so it'll have to be a new motion that is made then. I just want to make Chair, if you don't mind, one quick amendment to the motion to create the task force earlier, just thinking about the potential that for some reason I am wrong about quorum, which is possible as I thought about it more. I want to note that maybe we can allow either for 2 members to voluntarily choose, if, for example, if we can only have 2 members without triggering the Open Meetings Act, that maybe one of you would voluntarily drop off, and maybe we could appoint an actual voting member from the community who represents various parts of whether it be a housing provider, a tenants organization.
You represented tenants.
It looks like it is only 2 members that can participate.
So then in that case, I'd like to move that we have myself and Ugo on the task force. And then also a 2-member task force. I don't know how we can come to a conclusion if both of us have a tie vote. And so I'd like the chair to be able to appoint 2 members from, or 3 members from the community that represent the various sectors to be on the task force as well. Who can vote?
All right, is that clear to everyone what the amendment to the motion was?
The amendment would be that there'd be 2 members from this committee, voting members from this committee, and the chair could appoint 3 members from the community to be voting members. That way we have an uneven number of members on the committee, so we can actually get to a vote and move things forward.
What are the 3 groups?
It would be housing providers, residential or tenant advocates, and then tenants are the third group.
How about landlords?
Landlords or housing providers.
That's a group.
I'm sorry?
Those were done. Yeah, to those are, yeah.
No, well, yeah, you're right. There's a housing provider that is on this committee.
Tenants advocate and tenant are gonna have different perspective.
We've got 10.
Just go to the votes.
All right. Well, then I don't know of another, maybe a member at large but there's only, a limited number of folks who are interested. Yeah, it's tenant or landlord. So who else are who? Yeah, maybe someone who's from the legal, academic, whatever. We can create
because they will know
we can create a flex category then. And yeah, so then we'll have 3 members. One, we have myself, member Rodriguez, Am I getting your last name right? Rodriguez. Yeah, I don't know why. Member Rodriguez, as well as one member from the either tenant or tenant organizing community, another housing provider, and then a member who does not represent either one of those, but is either a lender, an academic, a legal professional, or some other category. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah, okay. So that's my amended motion there. Is there a second to that?
Second.
All right, roll call vote.
Chair Feingold,
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Hugo Rodriguez,
Aye.
Joanne Zulami,
Aye.
Chloe Thurston. Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
All right. I think we're at the point of staff updates. Is there any staff updates?
There are no updates for today's meeting.
All right, I think the meeting is adjourned.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.